Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Josh. I'm going to be your presenter today. Okay, so let's go into payroll real quick here. So we are simply talking about the payroll calculation process today, folks. Okay, I'm not talking anything about setting up employees and contractors today. So basically we're taking this or assuming it's at the point where the employees or contractors are set up and we're ready to begin paying employees, okay? I also have some employees who are set up for direct deposit. And again, we're assuming that direct deposit is set up, and I'm not covering anything on paying or setting up direct deposit today as well. If you are interested in learning more about like setting up direct deposit, go back to our Church Windows website here. Let me get here. I think I've got, do I have that here? Hang on, folks. Let me find something here real quick. Let's see, is it there? Yeah, Church Windows, right here under Customer Support Resource Center page. Sorry, folks, should have had that ready to go here. Right here under the search down the right side, put in direct deposit, and you'll notice here setting up direct deposit, paying by direct deposit. So if you're looking at more at setting it up, use that video as a resource to get that going. And if you have questions about it, please reach out to us. We're certainly happy to help you with that. Okay. Yeah, and again, just use the keyword or words direct deposit there to find that. Okay. So once we have everything set up, you know, the EFT pre-notify files come back from the bank with a, with an approval. Once we've got our employees set up with this, you know, in our employees contractors, if they're not direct deposit to receive checks, we're now in this position now. We've linked them into accounting, everything else. We're now ready to begin calculating our payroll to pay our employees. All right. And so it always starts by going to the calculate payroll here, or going up to payroll in the upper left corner and calculate payroll up there. Let me get out my highlighter to draw a little focus. So I'm talking about right here in the middle, or under payroll right up here, and then right below that, calculate payroll up here. Okay. You can access it in a couple different ways. That's why I like to make sure that folks are aware of that. I like the one in the middle, so I click on calculate payroll. So it's now opening our calculate payroll wizard. And again, many of you may be familiar with this, but I do this a lot, okay? As a technician who does a lot of accounting and payroll stuff, I'm acutely familiar with these screens, what they do. So that's why I'm doing the webinar today. So 3 dates are required. Pay date or settlement date, that's the date that the actual employees will be paid. That's the date that it reports on your reports in both payroll and accounting. If they are direct deposit employees, it is the date that the bank will be actually transferring the money from the church's account to the employee's account. Okay, so that pay date or settlement date is really important. All right, and a lot of folks will ask us here, you know, well, do I have to enter a pay period started and pay period ended? You do, folks. But you decide. It could be the same date for all 3 of them. It can be a range of dates for pay period started and ended. It's entirely up to you. But the software does require both a pay period started and ended. Okay? So in our case, we're doing this pay a little in advance. So I'm putting in July 31st as my pay date or settlement date, the final day of the year. Okay? It is during the week. So it is a weekday, a Thursday in this case. That's perfectly fine. If my employees were paid via direct deposit and the date fell on a weekend, I would need to make that date the Friday, at least the latest would be the Friday before that weekend pay date, right? Banks won't import direct deposit files with anything other than a business day, okay? So in this case, I'm verifying that that is a legitimate pay date for my direct deposit employees. So here then we're going to say our pay period started on July 11th and ends on July 25th. So our employees are paid semi-monthly. So we have 24 paychecks in the year. So it's from the middle of the month to the end of the month, or the beginning of the month and the middle of the month. So once I've gotten those pay date or settlement dates entered, I'm ready, and pay date, settlement date, and then the pay period started and ended, I'm ready to click next. Like I said, you can put in the same date for all three dates if you want. It is your choice. Okay? Pay period started and pay period ended really only reflects on the employee's paychecks. That's it. Nothing more. It just confirms the periods they're being paid for. Okay? So I'm ready to now click on next. Okay? And I'm going to talk through each one of these screens because they are named very specifically. So when I now go to next, it now brings up my filter payees screen. And I mean this right here, filter payees. Who am I paying? All right. That's essentially what it's asking me. So there are several options here for how you can do this. First of all, if we click our down arrow next to payee type, notice I can choose employees and contractors or contractors. Important to understand, I cannot pay contractors and employees simultaneously in the pay run. Okay? I have to post them as two separate pay runs, one for employees and one for contractors if I want to pay those folks. Okay? So in this case, we're paying our employees. You can filter your payees by any one of these options below. Their pay type, are they hourly or salaried? You want to filter them by pay period, okay? Bi-weekly, monthly, semi-monthly, or quarterly. Do I want to be able to filter them out by department or filter them by department? Basically select them, that's what I mean. And you can do it by a combination of choices here, folks. So you can go, okay, I want to choose any of my salaried employees who are, if I do uncheck all, paid monthly, as opposed to any of the other pay types. Okay? So you're not limited to just one of the options in one of these columns. You can do a combination of them. All right? You can include terminated payees as well if you wish. Not archived, but terminated. I'm a big fan of going to the option here in the middle, folks, called specific, right here, because this allows me to be able to isolate and pick employees that I want, basically from the entire list. But if you've got a lot of employees, maybe, the church has a lot of employees, and then maybe you've got a daycare or preschool or something, maybe it helps to do it or to filter them by these particular pay types. You know what I mean? The pay type, pay period, or department. Okay. In my case, I can just do, go to specific and I can just uncheck those that I want. But if I'm unsure about, pay period or pay type or what have you, then maybe I do want to use one of those other options. In this case today, I am paying all of the employees that are in this list. All of my employees are paid with the same frequency. They're not all salaried or all hourly, but they are all paid on the same pay dates. Okay. Let me take a quick look at my notes here. Yeah, and again, if I'm on the specific, I can uncheck specific employees that I don't want to pay. Yes, at my next screen, my review pay and rates tab or screen, I can uncheck the employees there as well, okay? But what it doesn't do is it doesn't systematically remove them from the screen. So it can be a little confusing as to what I'm looking at. I would actually prefer to deselect them here so I won't see them at the next screen if I don't want to pay them, okay? So once I've made my selections for my employees, I'm simply going to click next. And so what I was talking about before is this box down the left side here, this include list. So I work with users a lot who basically uncheck their employees there. Okay, so if basically I uncheck them, notice it deselects them from calculating a payroll, but it doesn't remove them from the list. Okay, so it can be confusing. It would be a great feature as if we unchecked them there that it would basically remove them from the list, but it doesn't. So it just doesn't do it yet, at least. Maybe we'll add that in future. Okay, so like I say, if I've got a whole bunch of employees in here that I'm really not paying, I might make a mistake and overlook something, just based on the additional number of names here. So that's why I'm saying I would prefer to omit them at the previous window, so I just simply don't see them here. But I'm paying everybody, okay? So here we are at the review pay and rates screen, all right? This information that's entered here is basically taken from the employee file, the employee or contractor file that I've set up, where I've set those folks up. Okay. We've got several tabs here over to the right-hand side: pay hours / rates, allowances, others, and deductions. But before I go to that, I've got several other tabs here. I've got the include column. I've got the name of the employee. I've got the payee number that Church Windows assigns to them. And it even has the last pay date for the employee. Okay. Some of you may be wondering, why does mine show 12/31 of 2025? Well, I've got training data here, and I've posted advanced payroll just for training data purposes. So I've got pay dates set up and posted for folks through the end of 2025. That's why that shows that date. Okay. But it's helpful. All right. So one other thing that we see here is, okay, so over on the right-hand side, let's look at our tabs now, and then I'll come back to this other final section here, final thing I want to talk about, is all of this information under pay hours, rates, allowances and other pay, deductions tabs are all gathered from the employee file. Okay. Even though these are the defaults that the software brings in, it's important that you know that anything here can be edited. Okay. So if, say, Larry, my senior pastor, or Jimmy, say, he's my custodian and part-time organist. So he works this default number of 45 hours per week at $16 an hour. Well, if I go, oh, well, Jimmy only worked 39 hours this past week, I don't have to go into his employee file and make the change permanently. It's not a permanent change. It's a temporary change. So I can just click right there, highlight his hours worked, and just edit those. Okay. If I want to pay him additional or overtime monies, I can just click in there, type in the number of hours and the pay rate, boom, it adds it in. Next paycheck, it just goes back to the default number of 45 hours and omits anything that I'd entered under additional or overtime. That's true for any employee, folks, on this screen. Okay, I can edit hours for employees, as we clearly saw. I can go to Larry and edit his gross pay amount over here by simply changing the amount. Okay. For, say, ministers, I click on the allowances and I can see the housing allowance or the allowances are set up, or anything that's set up as allowance, or deductions are set up for things like pension or health insurance contributions or what have you. Okay. All gathered from the employee file. But anything here can be changed or omitted. Okay. So if I go on a particular pay date, I want to pay Larry something, and I don't want to include his housing or something, I just go over to the minus sign over here to the very far right. Let me get out my highlighter right here and omit those. Okay. Same is true for my deductions. You can't just zero those out here, folks. So if you're needing to temporarily remove a deduction or allowance, you can't just change the amounts to or percent to zero. You actually have to temporarily remove it. Again, remember, next paycheck, when I come back in here and calculate a new payroll, these will all just pop back right back in where they are. I am simply making temporary changes or removals to those pay records as needed. I'm only going to go into the employee file and the contractor file and make permanent changes when a permanent change needs to be made to their pay setup. Otherwise, I'm going to do it on the fly here every time. Okay? All right, so if I go down the list and I go back to my pay hours and rates and I click on my employees and I go down here and I go, yep, everything looks good. I always advise clicking on each and every one of them every time to go, just to double check and make sure that everything's set up the way that it should be. Okay. Finally, notice down here, I've got Larry set up for PTO. If Larry is being paid for some paid time off, vacation or paid PTO or sick time, I can just key that in there and go, oh, he was paid for 3 days of PTO this pay period. Okay. That's applying that. And if there were an hourly employee, it would say, okay, here's the number of hours or days times their hourly rate. And then it would categorize that on their paycheck and on the reports as vacation or sick or PTO used. Okay. All right. So I'm not going to apply that to Larry's. Okay. So I'm ready to now go to next. Now, before I do that, I want to just change something here for Jimmy because I want to show you something. So when the software doesn't have something or has an issue, it's going to tell you. So if I now clicking next, it says some payees could not be processed. See will process column for information. Maybe some of you have seen this, okay? What it's talking about, though, is this column right here. It now only appears when I attempt to click next to process the pay, and it can't or it won't let me, okay? But notice here, Jimmy has a red X. If I hover over that and it brings up the floating help message, he said, come on, bring it up here. There it is. Pay rate or no hours entered. So it tells me exactly what's going on with that floating help message. Okay, maybe some of you can see that there. But it might be a little yield sign, folks. So that might be an indication again that maybe they were already paid on this date, or it might show some other reason. You know, pay cannot be less than 0. But let that will process column and floating help message tell you what's wrong when you have issues. So I now go back, I check Jimmy, I have to close, I have to go here and choose, say, regular, key in his $39, and I happen to know that his pay rate is 16 bucks. So I can just key that in there right there, and he's good. Okay? So now I can process to next. All right? So a new window opens up called Posting Selections here. Okay? So right here, Posting Selections. This is where we make the actual selections for what we want posted in and to payroll. Okay, what we're choosing to do. It defaults to the settlement, to verifying the settlement date for us, okay? It defaults to posting to payroll and as yes, because it's assuming we are. You can choose no and save it and come back in and post it later if you wish, but I don't use that very often. It also allows us to print reports. It also allows us to choose print checks, assign check numbers. Allows me to copy the EFT file to upload to my bank and transfer it to accounting. Keep in mind, folks, unless I print checks for those that are receiving checks and assign those check numbers, it will not transfer to accounting. Okay, that's simple. So I'm going to complete this process in its entirety. FYI, the line in terms of the posting is drawn on this window. Okay, in the bottom right, clicking next will post the payroll. So why that's important is I like to use this window and the Browse Payments to verify that the pay is correct. If I click Browse Payments, it allows me to see and examine the actual breakdown of each employee's pay, including their net pay amount up here in the upper right-hand corner right here for each one of their pays with their tax withholdings and all that other stuff, okay? So if I've set up a new employee, I can go through a mock payroll process, get to this posting selection screen, click Browse Payments, and look at their check without having posted anything. I just cancel out of the posting selections, the payroll calculation, nothing to void, okay? So you do not have to post a payroll in order to examine and see if an employee's payroll is set up correctly, all right? So as I'm taking a look through these, I'm going, yep, they're looking good. Everything's fine. I'm happy with that. I'm now ready to make my selections and click next. So I now click next. Okay. Here it's asking me, do I want to print these reports? You have flexibility and options here, folks. You don't have to print any or all of them if you don't wish. Okay. If I go, okay, I don't want taxable earnings or pay type earnings, I only want pay period deductions, I can remove the rest and go to next and it'll only print that one report. Okay. If I remove them all, it'll just skip over to the check printing or the EFT copy EFT page. Okay. I can save this selection as default. So if I don't want to have to deselect the taxable earnings and pay type report every time, check save as default and it'll only select pay period deductions. If I want to show the report form options forms, I would check that box. If not, it assumes that the defaults are what I want. And what I mean by that is checking that box, I click next. It opens up the actual pay period deductions report options where I can make selections for what do I want to include on the report. When I'm ready, I click next. print to open up the report. I now send that to my printer in the upper right-hand corner. Okay. It's got my 941 deposit for that pay period on there. I've printed it. I'm done. I close out. And now here I am at my EFT recipients page. So these are the folks who I'm going to be uploading the file to the bank. If I don't want to include them in the EFT file, I simply uncheck that box. But I do. I want both of these employees to be paid electronically on the 31st. Must click Next to generate the EFT data in the bottom right corner. If I click Next, it now allows me to choose where I want to save the file. I click Browse. If I want to choose where I want to put it, in this case the desktop is fine for me, but I might have a special folder for it. Then I click Save. It says file named EFT 250731_1.dat has been saved. Okay. Click OK on that. Now I go to print pay stubs in the bottom right. It now opens up my print EFT stubs. Verify the date, in this case July 31st. Should be the only one there, but you might have others. Then I go to Next, and then it's verifying who I'm printing stubs for. In this case, I want both of my employees for that. I can include a memo on their stub if I wish. And then when I'm ready, I click Next, and I choose the check layout, and I'm going to click Print EFT pay stubs, PFT stubs. I open up the preview of the report of their paychecks. It says non-negotiable. I make sure that there's plain paper in my printer, okay? And then I click the print icon in the upper left again to send it to my printer. And then I go grab those off the printer and make sure that they printed the way that I want them to, okay? When I verified that, I close out of the preview. I go to Next, okay? Folks, this is really important. This is how these things kind of get mixed up, is check numbers don't get properly assigned as folks try to use this X up here, and you really have to go down here and click Next. The Next button is really what's critically important for the software to function correctly. So I go to Next. I say Mark as printed. Yes, I've printed those stubs successfully. Okay, go to Next. I've got to check that box. Same is true for check printing. So it confirms that the stubs have been printed, and I click Finish. Now I have to go to Next again. Notice folks, I'm rarely going to the X. I'm having to go to Next. The X just closes out and it doesn't take you to the next window. Here I am to my check printing screen. I'm now ready to actually physically print the checks to the check stock for my employees who are receiving checks, or hard copy checks. Again, verify your pay date. In this case, July 31st. Next. Again, I now enter the starting check number. This is different from the other, but I have to go and make sure that I have the right starting check number. I can enter a memo for all my employees if I wish. Optional, not required. But then I put in my starting check number. And notice it now auto sequences that from this top number down to the bottom. All right, I can access my check register down here in the bottom left too. But I'm now ready to go to Next. Those check numbers are right. I've got them set up for everybody. And go to Next. I'm now back to my check layout and printing window, similar to my EFT pay stubs. So Church Windows supports two different styles, folks. Template check stub with the check on the top and the stub in the middle and the bottom, and another one for the default payroll check layout, which is check stub with the check in the middle. Okay, we're going to use the default payroll check layout. We do have a check designer function that if your checks don't align with the actual template or the default layout correctly, you can use the check designer to manipulate that and to get those to line up exactly right, but we're not covering that today. Okay? I think I've got a video or a document on the website on the payroll check designer anyway. We go right back to print checks. But notice, here's our click next to save check numbers, folks. You cannot X out of this. If you do that, it would not save them correctly. So now I'm going to click print checks. It opens up my preview. It does not say non-negotiable, so I've now got to put check stock in my printer and send those to my printer in the upper left again. All right. Once I've clicked print on that, folks, stop, wait. All right. This is really important. Go grab the checks off the printer. Examine them. Make sure that they're presentable. All right. It's really, really important step because I work with folks who go, oh, well, it printed correctly, and then they close out of it, and then they go to next, and they tell the system that the checks printed correctly, and then they find out that they didn't. And there is no reprint checks option in Church Windows Payroll or Accounting. I have to void that pay for that employee and go back in and reprint the check, recalculate the pay to reprint the check for them. So hang on and wait until you grab the checks off the printer. Okay? Because if I now close out and go to next, it now gives me the option, mark as printed. Did the checks print correctly? If one did not, I can uncheck it and I can go put it back in the print queue to print again. Okay, so I've saved myself time and effort. In this case, I have confirmed that the checks printed correctly. So I'm going to check the mark as printed. The software does it by default, assuming I've clicked print on that. Okay. But then I would simply go to next, and it says the checks were printed. Click finish. It now opens up my transfer to accounting window with all of my employees with all of their respective debit and credit accounts. And I simply click transfer in the bottom right. It says, ask me the question, do I want to transfer this to accounting? I'm going to click yes. It takes literally no time at all. And now do I want to print the transfer audit report? I'm not going to do that for expediency here today, folks. But I can always go back in and print the transfer audit report or any of the reports later. And then I click no, and it tells me the pay has been posted. It tells me what steps were completed, and I can print the summary and click finish if I wish. Okay? And that, folks, is our payroll calculation process for both direct deposit and employees who receive checks from start to finish.